I'll have you as well. PlayStation VR, PSVR2 will be available next week, and I know a lot of you are looking forward to it now, and no doubt many of you are already buying it. A lot of you may also be on the fence in terms of, is it worth actually buying? It's a question that is different for everyone, but I thought I would give you some of my thoughts on VR. I'm not buying it at launch. I'm not sold on it yet. I need to see more games available for it. And I've tried to say to myself, oh, it's worth it just for Gran Turismo, but it isn't. And I'm going to explain my thoughts. But if it is enough for you, then that's fine. You know, it's to each their own on this. But I wanted to talk a bit about VR, where we are with it right now, and is it really worth it for you? And I go back 10 years. I go back to Oculus Rift when it was first shown and testing that during E3 2013. And I went to this event in London, tried it out, and it was fantastic. I mean, there had been VR over the years, different versions of VR, virtuality in the 90s, stuff like that, but it was all a bit crappy. The screens weren't very good. The frame rate wasn't that great. Now we had new tech, and we had texturing, we had colour, we had lighting, we had scale. And I think the first thing that you notice when you put a VR headset on is that everything is life size. Everything suddenly becomes really big. You're not just playing it through your small monitor. A doorway is 6 foot, 7 foot high. It really adds a lot to the feeling of being there and the different game types. Then in 2015, I remember getting hold of the HTC Vive. I had a demo and then bought myself HTC Vive at launched, and I loved it. HTC Vive had a wide range of different games available. Room scale VR, which is for me a key selling point in VR. Being able to walk around your room and actually walk around the VR environment added so much to the VR experience. It made it more visceral. It made you feel more involved in that environment, the way you could walk around and look at things from different angles. And I tested all of the different games. I tested action games, shooting games, horror games. The horror games are not really for me, but I tested them anyway to see what they're all about. And there are some great titles, and I enjoyed it immensely. And then, a year, what are we at? Like a year or so later, we had the PlayStation VR. Now, I admit, when I first heard about the PlayStation VR, I wasn't entirely sold that the PlayStation 4 had the power to do it justice. I remember feeling, wouldn't it have been nice to have a bit more performance in the little black box to power the second eye, so that we didn't get such massive downgrades. And when you play games like Drive Club, you see the incredible potential. You're in a life-size car. You're there. It feels real. It feels visceral. You could drive. You could look to the apex. It's wonderful. And this is what Gran Turismo will give you now. But it was very blurry. The clarity wasn't there. And it was a test demo. The system didn't have the power. I tested a whole bunch of games on different demos. And Resident Evil 7 was probably the highlight for many people, a bit too scary for me. And Star Wars was one of my favourites, the Star Wars demo. I put a lot of time into that. I played that demo over and over and over again. I wish they'd released a lot more aspects to that demo and more missions. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And then, of course, finally in 2017, we had titles like Ace Combat. I say it wasn't the full game, but in terms of the demo and the tech that was in there, fantastic. Thoroughly enjoyed it. You were Top Gun. It felt great to play. But there's only so many times you can play a demo like that before you say, right, I've had enough now. I want to do something more. And then it goes into a box one day and you never touch it again. The demos that come out don't appeal. The racing games that I want to play with don't use it. Gran Turismo didn't use it. Third-party developments didn't use it. Racing games. Let's talk a bit about racing games. Project Cars 2 was a game that used it extensively in VR. And I would say that when I was using my HTC Vive, it really showcased to me what VR is like on a racing game can be. The different views of the cars, the feelings of claustrophobia in, say, a Formula car, as to opposed to the size of a bigger touring car. It gave you that feeling of being there. And I think also the demo, I remember trying iRacing in VR, which was hugely impressive. You could, again, look to the apex, place the car where you wanted to. I was in a full motion rig with full motion connected to what I was seeing, and it was another experience. It was very physical. You got out of the car afterwards feeling like you'd actually been there. Nothing comes closer than that. However, again, the resolution still left a lot to be desired, and we still have a long way to go to get that full clarity up to make it feel real. So driving experiences and the cockpit experiences I've mentioned are impressive, but again, at some point the HTC Vive goes in a box and you don't play it as often, because at some point the performance of the PC hardware, the lack of support from big titles, means that there just isn't enough to do. There's loads of indie stuff, there's loads of small titles, and I look to the PlayStation VR and I say there's loads of mini games and demos. There's only so many of those I can do, and I don't really feel like I'm getting my teeth into anything. So we look to the PlayStation VR2. Now the PlayStation VR2, we've got obviously PlayStation 5. It's much more powerful, but right now a lot of the games that you're seeing are PlayStation 4 games, compatible PlayStation 4 games released for PlayStation 5. We're in the crossover window. So a lot of the games you see right now aren't using the full power of PlayStation 5. We're not even close. And that means that we're in this window right now where your VR could come in very handy and games can be converted to use it. But over the course of the next couple of years, you're going to see games that really start to maximize the PS5, and the downgrades to work on VR will increase. That's my concern. And also, I haven't seen any other games using VR yet. I mean, if you said to me there were 5 or 6 really good games that use VR that I'm interested in, then I would jump at the chance, but there just isn't. The only couple of games that interest me is No Man's Sky, that's already available anyway. Resident Evil's too scary, I can't do all that, it's too stressful. And of course Gran Turismo. So there's No Man's Sky and Gran Turismo. I looked at the 97 games available on a Eurogamer's recent video, and I realised that 95 of them didn't really appeal to me in VR. I feel like I've done them before. If I want to play Beat Saber, I've got it on HTC Vive. If I want to play many of those other demos, I've already got it, albeit on a lower pixelated but room scale VR. So these are the questions I ask myself moving forward. Is it really worth it? My PSVR went in a box in 2017 and I haven't touched it again since. In fact, the only good thing about the PlayStation VR was it was pretty cool when you looked at 3D Blu-rays, and I did like the idea of the big screen experience for games, but at the same time the resolution, it's still 1080p even on the PSVR2 when you're using the big screen mode, and I don't think it's going to use, I'm not aware, but as far as I'm aware it doesn't use 3D Blu-rays, which I think is a real shame, because it's something about VR which lends itself perfectly to that format. It really does make the idea of that 3D effect and the detail that you see almost a higher level of clarity. But either way, I wanted to share some thoughts, so I'm rolling it over and I'm saying to myself, wow, Gran Turismo, I'd like to play it. I do have another issue with Gran Turismo, and that is I can't stream it and do VR and read comments right now. That's a big issue for me ongoing if I go back to streaming Gran Turismo again, because it's not practical to stream. So you'll see streams at launch, but I'll be interested to know how the VR's used in months to come to make it absolutely worth it. It still feels to me like we need another generation to really maximize this for third-party publishers. Again, looking at the top titles, I'm looking at Gran Turismo, Sony, the Horizon demo, Sony in-house, No Man's Sky, sort of developed with Sony, and a lot of the stuff is very much connected to in-house or very big studios, and I want to see more support. So, what am I thinking? Give me 10 games that I look at and say, this is absolutely worth it. Give me some really cool cockpit experiences. Give me a new Wipeout. Let's see what happens with the other racing games coming out in the format in the next couple of years. Give me a reason, something to look at and say that's absolutely worth it. But for now, at £570 for the PSVR with the game and the controllers, plus your games on top. You're talking at the end of the day probably you'll get a couple of VR games because you may as well, and it's £700, and it's a big investment, and it's just a bit too much for me right now. So I'm just going to sit on the fence, I think, and wait until we see how it develops, and then we'll just wait and see from there. What do you think of VR, of PlayStation VR? Are you buying it day one? What games are you buying it for? What are the experiences that you're really looking forward to testing? Give me 5 different games, obviously excluding the in-house Gran Turismo and Horizon. Give me 5 different games that you say, I'm really looking to playing these 5 experiences. Tell me things I've not heard of, I can check out and see what they're all about. I'm all ears to see where some of this stuff goes. But that's it from me for now. As ever, more soon.